We were invited today to discuss with all of you the topic of healthy living, specifically with traditional organic foods. So I'm going to start my presentation. First, I'll just give you a bit of an introduction. So as it was mentioned, my background is in nutritional science. So I studied nutrition at the University of British Columbia, which led me into an interest in the end, actually more into traditional foods and traditional diets, because I recognize through my studies that we still have a lot of questions when it comes to nutrition. In fact, one of my professors told the class, in nutrition, you have to be ready 1 year to say the opposite from what you said the year before, because everything is so new. We're always finding out more and more. And when I was introduced to Ayurveda and traditional diets, especially from countries like Sri Lanka, I was fascinated because for thousands of years, there's been a culture of food as medicine and healthy eating. So I really trust that, in thousands of years, we've been able to learn a lot about human health, which is why I like to come in, the science, but going back always to the tradition, because the science is new and we're always discovering new things. But what we know has been known for thousands of years is working. I think it's important to combine the two. So on that note, I'm going to try to start this presentation. Okay, so today I'll be talking about healthy living with traditional organic foods. I'd like to start by just asking everyone to reflect on what it means to be healthy. What is good health? So is health just the absence of disease or disease symptoms, regardless of how you're feeling, regardless of how well you're living? Is it living longer, regardless of the quality of life? So perhaps having a longer life, but do you feel good? Or is it just better access to medicine, medical services, health coverage, pharmaceutical drugs? Because often this is how health is defined in the modern world. So we look at countries that have access to a lot of pharmaceuticals, a lot of Western medicine, and we say, oh, they're living longer, okay, that's healthy. But is it also a state of balance where all of the cellular functions, including immunity and detoxification, are running at optimal capacity? Increased vitality, resilience, and longevity with a good quality of life, where you not only live longer, but also feel good. Or perhaps better access to foods as medicines that are as healing as they are nourishing and do not compromise the body's integrity. So just to go back in history a little bit and get a historical perspective on health. This is actually a picture of a very ancient manuscript, the Charaka Samhita, which is the world's oldest and most ancient manuscript about medicine, so medical manuscript. And a quote from this passage says, "A physician who fails to enter the body of a patient with the lamp of knowledge and understanding can never treat disease. He should first study all the factors, including environment, which influence a patient's disease, and then prescribe the treatment. It is more important to prevent the occurrence of disease than to seek a cure." And according to that philosophy, the building blocks of good health, it's really based on something that's called the dosha theory in Ayurveda. So the doshas are the 3 subtle humors in the body, and they're combinations of the 5 elements. So without going too far into that, you can see that there are 3 doshas, which are called vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata is a combination of ether and air. Pitta is a combination of water and fire, and kapha is a combination of earth and water. And those are actually subtle influences on the body that dominate all of the different metabolic functions, such as breathing in the lungs, digestion, elimination, metabolism, the nervous system. So all the systems of the body are governed by these elements and the doshas. So I don't have time to go too far into that, but that's just to give an understanding of where this knowledge is rooted in. It's very ancient. So according to these theories, which are really global, it's not only in Ayurveda and in South Asia, but all over the world, we have this kind of traditional knowledge, which is that good health really relies on order and equilibrium. So it's all about balance. Central to this approach is the idea that maintaining equilibrium between the elements and their doshas will lead to overall health. And this careful balance is achieved in the body as a result of countless interdependent cellular functions, and they all act in synergy to achieve what we now know in Western medicine as homeostasis. Have anyone heard of this term homeostasis before? This is familiar. So basically what it means is it's the body maintaining its critical temperature, pH level, you know, all the different levels of like calcium in the blood, for example, just so that all the systems can run in a certain range. Because for our cells to function, they need a very certain range. That's why when we say we're sick, oh, I have a fever, you know, your body is fighting an infection, so it goes a little warmer, but then it comes back to the right temperature. When we eliminate things, you know, we always digest and eliminate and store nutrients to make sure that our blood pH always remains at the right pH. So everything in the body has to be at a certain level, and all the cells in our body contribute to that through many, many different cellular functions to achieve what we call homeostasis. And that is what we mean by balance. So everything is balanced in the body and can run smoothly like a beautiful machine or a plant growing. This is a cell. So health actually relies on order and equilibrium at the cellular level. To maintain balance, our cells are constantly working to regulate the body's temperature, pH, nutrient levels, electrolyte levels, available energy, and much more, as I mentioned. Factors such as diet, environment, and age can affect this balance, and our cells must react accordingly to maintain the balance our survival depends on. So they're always reacting to whatever's happening in the body and working very hard to maintain that equilibrium. In Ayurveda, we also say that disequilibrium is the root of disease. So what happens once we start to lose that equilibrium? Now our cells have to work even harder to maintain it, and things are going to start to go out of balance. It could cause stress on the cells as they work to maintain homeostasis, which can lead to excess or deficiency in key metabolites. So for example, if there's a certain mineral that your cells need to maintain that balance, and you're always pushing yourself off the balance, then the cells are going to use up that mineral more quickly, or the vitamin, or you know, whatever it is. There's going to be now more imbalance because everything is trying to keep that critical balance, but all of the other systems are going to go off balance. And Ayurvedic theory tells us that disease is like a tree. The deeper its roots in our system, the more difficult to treat. I don't know if anyone does gardening. I actually started gardening last summer. And I can tell you those weeds, they're really tricky. Like if you try to pull the weeds when it's too late, it's really difficult. You got to start getting your shovel and you know, and then come back. So it's just like that with disease. If you pluck it when it's small, like when it's just like a small little weed, it's easy to treat. But if you let the disease, you know, manifest more and more and more until its roots start to really build their way into your system, then it's really hard to take it out. It gets more and more difficult to treat the more it becomes, you know, more established in the system. And many disease symptoms only appear after those roots have become well established. So it's like it's growing underground and you don't see it growing yet, but there's an imbalance and it's setting the stage for disease. Prevention and early treatment are always preferable to curing a disease once it's well established. And often diseases can be completely prevented by just correcting the underlying imbalance that would have caused them in the first place. So even before there's any disease symptoms, if that imbalance is corrected, you can actually prevent many diseases. This is a little bit complicated. I won't spend too much time, but here you have a picture in the background of a liver. And the liver is the organ in the body that detoxifies. So we actually live in a toxic world. There are so many chemicals and pollution everywhere. We're always just working hard in our body to maintain that equilibrium and really survive by eliminating so many toxins that we have in our body. Now, one thing that's important to note is that there are a lot of nutrients used up in these detoxification pathways. So this is the liver. These are the different metabolic pathways of detoxification. And there's so many nutrients that we need to do that. There's all these B vitamins. There's also polyphenols and flavonoids, which are plant chemicals or phytonutrients. There's all of these amino acids like glycine, taurine, glutamine, cysteine, methionine. So all of these are really necessary for that detoxification to run smoothly. Unfortunately, we are also exposed to agents that are completely unnatural. We know about probiotics now and antibiotics, but how many of you have heard about xenobiotics? So this is actually a topic I was introduced to in university. I did some directed studies at a time when we weren't talking so much about pollution and plastics and endocrine disruptors, but I found out early on that this is a problem, which is really alarming because xeno means foreign. So these are things that are foreign to our biology. We actually don't know what to do with them. Once we ingest these or we're exposed to these chemicals, because they're so foreign, we don't even know how to detoxify them. The definition of a xenobiotic is a chemical compound foreign to a given biological system. With respect to animals and humans, xenobiotics include drugs, drug metabolites, and environmental compounds such as pollutants that are not processed by the body. In the environment, xenobiotics include synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and industrial pollutants that would not be found in nature. So by definition, these are foreign to life. And unfortunately, as our cells attempt to detoxify them, they sometimes become even more toxic during the phase 2 reaction. So I showed you the liver. There's 2 different phases to detoxification. And what can happen is that sometimes the phase 2 doesn't work properly, and it actually makes it more toxic to the body. So we don't even know how to detoxify it, and it leads to even more problems. Because our biology is not designed to handle these man-made poisons, and their metabolism will cause stress to our biology. So really what it does is when you're exposed to these xenobiotics, it causes imbalance and things start to go off. Every step along the way, our detoxification pathways depend on critical cofactors that integrate key vitamins and minerals. And when our detoxification pathways work over time, there's an increased risk in depletion of these critical cofactors. So eventually we'll start to feel imbalance and illness because detoxification is prioritized. Other biochemical processes that depend on these cofactors may become impaired. So all of those B vitamins that we need and amino acids that are really important for our brain health and neurotransmitters, among many other things, they'll start to become depleted because we must use them all up to detoxify, and now we're missing them for those other critical reactions that we actually require them for. And these processes that we would normally need those vitamins and amino acids for include hormone and neurotransmitter synthesis, gene regulation, so how our DNA is expressed in the body, energy metabolism, cellular division, and many, many more. So you can imagine how important it is that we don't waste these precious nutrients always on detoxifying only. I'm going to take a bit of time to take a little deep dive into something called glyphosate. But first, I just want to pause and see if any of you have heard of this chemical before, glyphosate. So recently in Sri Lanka, actually, there was a bit of a scandal around glyphosate because it is the most commonly used herbicide in the world and very heavily sprayed in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, by people who are growing agricultural products, food, and who are using it to remove the weeds. It's also known as Roundup, and it has a few other commercial names, but the chemical is called glyphosate. And because it's so commonly used, it's actually the most common chemical pervasive in the whole world. It's contaminating our environment, our air, our waterways, and our bodies. So it's important. I want to take a little pause here to really look at glyphosate carefully, because in Sri Lanka in particular, there's been a lot of movement to try to ban it. And unfortunately, it kind of keeps coming back, and they keep finding ways from the industry to allow its use. But it really is toxic. And sadly, it's affecting people's health very badly with high cancer rates and also kidney disease in Sri Lanka, which is very likely tied to its use. So it's important to know what are we talking about. So it's a herbicide. Basically, it's used to kill weeds. So once it's sprayed on the ground, it will just kill the weeds. And this is its chemical structure here. If any of you know chemistry, you might notice that it has this phosphate group here. So that's what makes it kind of polar, and it can penetrate cell membranes. Now, we're going to talk about glyphosate because it is the primary active ingredient in Roundup and the most heavily used agricultural chemical in the history of the world. Also, because of GMO crops, so genetically modified crops, which are called Roundup Ready, these crops are actually, they're actually sprayed with glyphosate to remove the weeds, but they survive because of the genetic engineering. So they're just covered in glyphosate, and that's often in corn and soy and other non-organic crops. Also in grains and pulses, such as wheat, oats, chickpeas, lentils. Now, and especially this is happening in Canada, which is really a problem, a lot of farmers are now spraying the crops with glyphosate before they harvest. So not just to remove the weed, but actually to dry the crop as a desiccant. So the food that we're eating is now being sprayed with glyphosate before the harvest. So then people are just eating it. Now, while it was originally marketed as a safe alternative to deadly herbicides such as paraquat, a growing amount of scientific literature actually points to its detrimental effects on human health. And its excessive use has actually resulted in weed resistance and a resurgence of other even more dangerous herbicides like 2,4-D, dicamba, and paraquat. Now, one really troubling thing is that glyphosate is actually patented as an antibiotic. So if anyone has heard about the microbiome, the gut microbiome, you know, sometimes we take probiotics for gut health. It's actually an antibiotic. So every time we eat something with glyphosate, it's killing our healthy microbes in the gut. It's also killing the soil microbes in the ground. And it works as an antibiotic by this, what's called the shikimate pathway. So basically in the bacteria, there is a compound called shikimate. And for the bacteria to survive and multiply, there's a pathway where it becomes charismate. And glyphosate blocks this pathway. So it kills the bacteria by blocking that pathway. So this is why originally the regulators said, oh, it's safe for humans because we don't have the shikimate pathway, except we actually have a microbiome in our gut of bacteria, which we call healthy bacteria, which do use that pathway. And now we're eating glyphosate, which is killing those healthy bacteria. And then what happens to this product called charismate in the bacteria? Well, it is metabolized to become all of these amino acids, which we actually require to make neurotransmitters. It becomes the B vitamin folate, vitamin K. So all of these are produced in the gut by our healthy gut bacteria. And now we're eating a chemical that blocks the synthesis of all of these things. And, you know, dopamine is what they call like the reward chemical, the happy chemical in the brain. Epinephrine is really what gives us like, you know, drive. It's adrenaline. Serotonin is the happy chemical. Thyroid hormone is so important to balance all of our hormones. So we are actually eating foods that poison us to the point where the gut bacteria can no longer help us produce all of these brain chemicals, vitamins. It's really frightening, actually. The other thing about glyphosate is there's a lot of research showing that it actually acts as a glycine analog. And glycine is a amino acid, which is a building block of like all of the connective tissue, collagen, so many parts of our body use glycine in high amounts. And what glyphosate does is it actually mimics glycine. So you see the molecule really looks very much the same. You've got the same here, OOH, you've got the little nitrogen with the hydrogen, and there's this phosphate group added on. So if anyone knows about chemistry, you would know this phosphate group is polar, and it actually allows things to cross the cellular membranes. So now what's happening, according to some research that's been done by MIT scientists, they've looked in a lab to see what are cells doing when they're exposed to this glyphosate. And they could tell from the metabolites in the cells that it looks like they're constantly building proteins and then breaking them down, and then building them again, and then breaking them down. Because the protein's not folding properly, it's not functioning properly, probably because glyphosate could be actually added into the protein structure, and then the cell recognizes, oh, this isn't working, and it has to break it down, and then it has to build it again and break it down. So imagine the amount of stress and pressure that puts on our metabolism if it's happening all the time, everywhere in our body. Basically, here's an example of a protein that can't fold properly because now it's got this phosphate group in the middle that's never supposed to be there because glyphosate was taken up as a glycine analog. So this is still under research, but there's a lot of evidence showing that this is actually the case. Also, it acts as an endocrine disruptor, and this is really frightening. Glyphosate has been shown to exert a strong epigenetic influence on human cell lines, causing hypomethylation and altered gene expression. Now, we depend on regulators to kind of like switch on and off our genes in our DNA. We have a lot of genes that are dormant, and then they can be activated to produce a certain protein and then switched off. And that switching on and off of the genes is what's called epigenetics, and it really depends on a process called methylation. Now, glyphosate goes in and it causes altered gene expression by affecting the methylation. A recent study from France actually found that normal human breast cancer cells switched over to aggressive breast cancer cells when exposed in a lab to glyphosate at levels below 2 parts per trillion. So, you know, sometimes people say, oh, it's just trace amounts. It's really fine. It's not going to harm you. 2 parts per trillion is like 1 grain of sand in an Olympic pool. Okay, so they had 1 grain of sand worth of glyphosate in an Olympic pool. That's the concentration. And they showed that it could make tumor cells become aggressive tumor cells. And we're eating this all the time. So glyphosate is also a chelator. It actually binds to metals. It was originally used as an anti-corrosive for pipes in industrial use before it became an agricultural chemical. So its main action is to chelate metals. And you know, I heard a story that when those some industrial engineers, or I'm not sure who, noticed that when they were using this glyphosate on the pipes to avoid the corrosion, when it fell on the ground, it killed all the plants on the ground. And so people said, perfect, let's put it in our food, you know, because it kills the plants. So this is how toxic it is. This is an image of what the glyphosate does, where it basically binds to the metals, and it can tie up all of these essential minerals that we actually need in our body. You know, so iron, copper, calcium, manganese, selenium, magnesium, all of these can get bound up with glyphosate. And the really scary thing is that glyphosate is only one out of hundreds of chemicals. And I mentioned before, this one was supposed to be safe. This is the one that people said, oh, it's so safe, we can use it on everything, it's fine. So imagine that so many hundreds of chemicals are being sprayed on food all the time. Now, given what we know about human health, genetics, epigenetics, how can we hope to achieve good health when we continue to eat poisons? Many studies do point to a direct link between the use of glyphosate and other pesticides to very poor health outcomes. They could range from cancer to autoimmunity, with everything in between. So just take a moment to reflect on that. And, you know, this is why we really believe that organic is the future. We really believe that choosing organic is choosing health. And I just want to take a minute before Chanaka starts his portion of the presentation to mention these women in Sri Lanka who are growing turmeric for our Chaz Organics line that I'm showing here. The turmeric that our farmers are growing in Sri Lanka is very high potency. It's actually 4 to 6% curcumin, and that's the anti-inflammatory agent in turmeric, which is so healthy and so healing. So the really good news is that if you do eat a traditional diet, I know that in Sri Lankan cuisine, there's a lot of turmeric used, there's a lot of coconut. And if you choose those traditional foods and go to an organic source for the ingredients, or grow your own and choose organic as much as possible, you really can achieve very good health and optimum health. And you don't have to rely on, you know, drugs or pharmaceuticals, because this food is your medicine. And turmeric actually has been shown in hundreds of studies to counteract so many of the problems that I just discussed, because I know it can sound scary. You know, there's so many problems in the world, but the good news is that nature actually provides us with all the tools we need all the time for any situation. And turmeric really is one of those tools that can be used the most because it's good for, they call it tridoshic, it's good for all the doshas. If you're vata, pitta, kapha, it's anti-inflammatory. It's been shown to actually destroy cancer cells, to completely reverse cancer. It can protect from not only cancer, but also radiation. So even if people are going under, cancer treatments, protect the liver by, helping it to detoxify. So all of those kind of more scary things I discussed before, a lot of them actually can be addressed just by choosing healthy organic foods like turmeric that are part of a traditional diet. So I'm just going to...
ඇත්තට මැරිස් කිව් එකේ පුංචි සාරාංශයක් විදියට බොහොම සරලව අරගත්තොත් අපි අපේ මේ ශරීරයේ මනුෂ්‍ය ශරීරයේ අපිට ලැබෙන්නේ තාමත් ස්වභාව ධර්මයේ දායකයක් විදියට. එතකොට මේ අපේ ශරීරය ජීවත් කරවන්න අපි ආහාරනේ අරගන්නේ. ඒ ආහාරات අපිට ලැබෙන්නේ ස්වභාව ධර්මයෙන්. ස්වභාව ධර්මයෙන් දෙන ආහාර රසායනික පොහොර සහ රසායනික ද්‍රව්‍යව මිශ්‍ර කරන්නයි කියලා අපිට ස්වභාව ධර්මයේ උගන්වලා නැහැ. එතකොට අපේ ශරීරයට ජීවත් වෙන්න නම් ජීවත් කරවන්න නම් ඒ ස්වභාවික ආහාර වේල ඒ විදිහටම අරගත්තොත් අපේ ශරීරය දන්නවා ඒක ඒ ආහාර ජීර්ණය කරන්නේ කොහොමද? ඒකේ අවශ්‍ය නියුට්‍රියන්ට්ස් කොහොමද අපේ ඇඟ ඇතුලේ තියාගන්නේ? අවශ්‍ය නැති දේවල් මොනවද කියලා ඒක අඳුරගෙන පිට කරන්න ස්වභාවික ආහාර ස්වභාවික ශරීරයක් ඇතුළට ගියාම ස්වභාවිකවම සිද්ධ වෙනවා. ඉතින් අවාසනාවකට අද අපි ගොඩක් ගන්න ආහාර වේලවල් හරිම විශේෂයිත ආහාර වේලවල් තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒක කවුරු හරි එක්කෙනෙක් මේ වහ කුප්පියක් අපිට ගෙනල්ලා දෙනවා වගේ වැඩක් තමයි කරන්නේ. ඒක අපි දන්නවා නම් මේ බොන්නේ වහයිය කියලා කවදාවත් ඔබ කරන්නේ නැහැ. නමුත් අපි ඒක ආහාරත් සමග මිශ්‍ර වෙලා තියෙන නිසා අවාසනාවකට මේ වගේ දේවල් වලට මුහුණ දෙන්න සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් විශේෂයෙන්ම අපේ තව වැදගත් දෙයක් තමයි අපේ රට අපි ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ශ්‍රී ලාංකිකයෝ අපි සියලු දෙනාම අපි තමයි වාසනාවන්ත ජාතියක් අවාසනාවන්ත තත්ත්වයකට පත් වෙලා ඉන්න. අපිට තිබුණ රීජනරේටිව් ඕගැනික් ප්‍රතිඋත්පාදන කාබනික ගොවිතැන කියන කොන්සෙප්ට් එක අපේ රටේ ඒක ඇතුලේ වහ කියන දේවල් කොහොමවත් තිබුණේ නැහැ. ඉතින් කොහේ හරි තැනකදී අපිට ඒක නැති වුණා. අපේ රටවල් වල අපිට අපේ ආහාර රටාවේ තියෙන සංස්කෘතිය අපිට තියෙන ආහාර සංස්කෘතිය ෆුඩ් ට්‍රෙන්ඩ් එකක් නේ ෆුඩ් කල්චර් එකක් තියෙන්නේ. ඒ ආහාර සංස්කෘතිය ඇතුලේ අපේ ශරීරයට අවශ්‍ය සියලුම නියුට්‍රියන්ට්ස් ලබා ගන්න විදිහ ඉතාම සමබරව තියෙන. අපි බත් පිඟානක් බෙදා ගත්තාම පලා වර්ග ප්‍රෝටීන හැම දෙයක්ම ඒක ඇතුලේ තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒක අපි ඉතාම බොහොම සමබර ආහාර වේලක් විදිහට තමයි අරගන්නේ. හුඟක් දැන් බටහිර රටවල් වල නම් ඒගොල්ලන් ගොඩක් පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ නියුට්‍රිෂස් ඩයට් එකක්. අපි පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ බැලන්ස් ඩයට් එකක්. වෙනස අපි බැලන්ස් ඩයට් එකක් ගත්තාම අර නියුට්‍රිෂන්ස් ඔක්කොම සමතුලිතව අපිට ලැබෙනවා. ඉතින් එක දෙයක් වැඩිපුර නැතුව හැමදේම සමබරව ඒ විදිහට තමයි අපේ ආහාර සංස්කෘතිය පිළියෙල කරලා තිබුණේ. නමුත් ඒක දැන් කම්පැනි වලින් ගිලගෙන තියෙන අපේ රටේ අපිට උරුම වෙලා තිබිච්ච ආහාර සංස්කෘතිය. ඉතින් thanks for inviting us. This is a great opportunity, especially to see these beautiful faces. For me, like we learn from you. So like it's really inspiring to see this type of initiative, and thank you so much for inviting us. And
thank you.
Yeah, we'll leave our website and everything for you guys if you want to see what we do.
Yeah.